Hi everyone, it's William. I'm coming at you today from the ground floor of Schatzalp for the Grand Duke Dmitri 1939 Diary series. And behind me you see telephone booth number 1. And I'm standing here today because a telephone figures in the bit that we're going to cover today. So I'll just back up here and you can see the rest of the telephone area. Naturally, these booths are no longer in use. You have booth number 2, booth number 3, and then what's really fantastic, try to get a good view of it, is this old, what would you call it? Telephone exchange cabinet operators, I don't know, apparatus. And this was still in use when I first came to Schatzalp, but that was over 30 years ago. It is, of course, no longer. Now it's just a historical artifact, you could say. But any call that Dmitri made at Schatzalp or received at Schatzalp would, of course, have come through this switchboard. That's the word I was looking for. Okay. And behind me, this used to be, Schatzalp had its own post office. And that used to be in here. So anyway, here we go. I'm going back to the desk now where my text is. And sorry, for a minute there, my laptop didn't want to recognize my fingerprint, which is how I unlock it. Okay, I'm setting this. I'm gonna adjust this. Pardon my big hand there. How's that? I guess that's all right. I wanted today to do, on the same day as making this video, I wanted to go down to town and record with my selfie stick, of course, well, in the English Quarter, as it was called back in the sanatorium era, and where the Hotel Angleterre was, which, as you already know, is where Dmitri spent his first night, actually his first 2 nights in Davos. And where are my glasses? So hopefully, as I keep working with this selfie stick, I will get better at it and it won't be quite so comical. But anyway, I decided not to walk into town today. It's not just a walk, it's a hike, both down and back up. And so I am a little tired today, so I'm not going to do that, but I do have to be in town tomorrow, so I will add that video to go along with this one. All right, so our recap. This is, of course, the 23rd of September, 1939, Dmitri writing to his sister, and it's a very long letter, and so we're doing it in pieces. If this is the first video you have watched, you can find parts 1 through 4. Also, this is part 5, and our recap from part 4. Well, Dmitri arrived in Davos at the Davos Platz train station, and he found the town quite eerily deserted, especially of men, with the exception of elderly men, because this was the same day as the German invasion of Poland, and the Swiss army had already been mobilized. And since all males were required at that time to do military service and then be in the reserve until they, I think, were in their 50s, they were called up. They were mobilized, and so the town had a shortage of both men and horses. But Dmitri managed to get to his hotel. All right, and our cast for today, we have the proprietor of the Angleterre Hotel, Dmitri doesn't give his name. I could probably find out. In fact, I'm sure I have it written down somewhere, but not important, not important. And a barber who also is unnamed, and then Dr. Maurer, the head doctor or chef arzt here at Schatzalp in 1939. All right, here we go. At the Hotel d'Angleterre, I received an exceptional welcome because I was one of only 3 guests staying there. The proprietor couldn't figure out what I was even doing there, but the next day he understood because, with the cloying expression of an all-forgiving father on his face, he approached me, barely restraining his urge to slap me on the back, and said, in quotes, "Don't worry, I know everything, and tomorrow your room will be disinfected for an additional charge of $750 in Swiss francs." At first, I just stood there looking at him and couldn't figure out what he was talking about. But then he pointed at his chest and said that he too had had la maladie, but had recovered. Everyone here speaks exclusively of la maladie. No one calls the damn thing by its actual name. Imagine how I felt when I went to get a haircut later that day, and the stinking barber said, "It's a good thing you're not sick," meaning he hadn't heard me cough, "because all the sanatoriums are closed, the doctors have been mobilized, and the patients have all gone home!" Exclamation point. That threw me into a complete panic. I spent the afternoon on the telephone, but fortunately my sauna in quotes, spelled S-A-N-A, turned out to be open. I spoke to the doctor and arranged a rendezvous for the next day, Saturday, 2nd September at 11:30 a.m. Okay, so far Dmitri has not been to Schatzalp, but now he has spoken to Dr. Maurer on the telephone. Okay, so only 3 people at the Angleterre, and it's a big hotel. The building is no longer there, but I will be, I'll be using a picture of the Angleterre for the thumbnail for this video, and the thumbnail image, and I also will be posting it in full on the Grand Duke Dmitri Diaries Facebook page. So only 3 people there, and people reacted to, they hadn't had time to actually leave Davos since the war began, because it wasn't even official yet on that particular day, but obviously people knew it was going to happen. And Davos was and is a very cosmopolitan town. Back then you had sanatorium patients and tourists for the winter sport and the summer sport, and nowadays the same, but without the sanatoriums. So yeah, that's when war breaks out, people want to go home. And I remember that same sense when I was here 2019 and received news that the borders and the flights and various other things would be closed down within 2 days of my arrival. And I felt a sense of panic. I went straight down after my arrival, after putting my suitcases in my room. I went straight down to the train station to see about, I actually didn't just see about it. I did change my ticket so that I could leave that evening. And then when I came back up at Schatzalp, the director, Paulo Bernardo, said to me, "Look, don't leave." I remember that very well. He said, "We're all in this together, and this is the best place for you to be." And it was. Anyway, so Dmitri, of course, unlike me, wouldn't be staying in an empty establishment, although he almost was, with only 3 people staying at the Angleterre. So yes, he says he was given a very warm, or he says exceptional welcome there. But the proprietor just couldn't understand why he would be there. Why are you coming to Davos now? You're not Swiss, you're not a local person, you're coming to a hotel, why? But then, of course, he understands as soon as Dmitri coughs. Okay, now I know why you're here. And he immediately, without, really any tact at all, I mean, it was nice of him to say, oh, well, I recovered from this disease, sort of with the implication that you can recover too. And it's true that a lot of people who were at the sanatoriums and recovered then stayed on in Davos because their TB was now in remission, and they didn't want to risk the reactivation of the disease, and they'd done well in the climate in Davos. They'd recovered, and so they didn't want to risk leaving with that fresh mountain air and the climate. So they opened businesses. So this would not have been a rare occurrence to find someone in town who'd had that experience. But as someone who'd had that experience, he perhaps should have realized that that this was very tactless to not only reveal, I see you're diseased, you have this disease, but also, yeah, and we'll be charging you another $750 for your room to be fumigated. And that wasn't a small amount of money. It wasn't a small amount. It was maybe something like around $50. I need to look that up for sure. And Dmitri was a little cash short at this time. But I don't think that's what worried him, obviously. What worried him, or what upset him, was the way the proprietor had handled this. And then he also objects to the term la maladie, which in French means the disease, and in German would be die Krankheit. And in fact, there's a famous book, well, not famous really, other books he wrote are more famous, but a famous author, Alfred Henschel, who went by the pen name Klabund, and he wrote a book called Die Krankheit. So that was what the disease was called here in Davos amongst German speakers and amongst French speakers, la maladie, maybe in English consumption, I don't know. But Dmitri is already having a bad experience, and so he adds this, no one calls the damn thing by its actual name. That irritates him a little. All right, fair enough. Let's see. And the barber, so he goes off to the barber. He must have been really tired from the trip, but I guess, he that was something he hadn't done in Paris. He felt that he needed to do. And although I don't think this is what he had in mind, but of course, back at that time, before, even now, I'd say you go to a barber, you come to a new town, you go to a barber or a hairdresser, and if you're receptive to it, you're going to hear things. You're going to hear what the local news is, what the local gossip is. But in this instance, the barber, the stinking barber, as Dmitri calls him, because again, it was a very upsetting experience, and he just had one in the hotel, and here's another one. And he, unlike the hotel proprietor, doesn't seem to know that Dmitri is sick. If he does know, then he was being particularly mean, because he makes the statement, it's a good thing you're not sick, because all the sanatoriums are closed, the doctors have been mobilized, and the patients have all gone home. Whoa, okay, that's not what you want to hear when you've come here with the specific purpose of surviving and seeing this as your only path to surviving this disease. And then the barber tells you, yeah, sorry, no more sanatoriums. So was this true? Obviously, it wasn't true with respect to Schatzalp. Was it true in general that certainly not that all the sanatoriums were closed. It's, if you look at the newspaper for that time, you see that they're still running ads. The sanatoriums and the hotels, they're still running ads. But what does change is that most of the sanatoriums are no longer publishing their guest lists. So that was something that every hotel and sanatorium and pension had always published every week their guest list. So anybody could pick up this little local paper and see exactly who was staying in the sanatoriums and in the other establishments, accommodations. And Dmitri, his name would appear also published on all these guest lists. But Schatzalp was one of only 2 or 3 sanatoriums. No, more than that, but still, the majority of them stopped publishing their guest lists, and I don't know why they made the decision at Schatzalp to continue to do that. But anyway, the sanatoriums were not all closed, and the hotels were not all closed. But how can you stay open when you have only 3 guests, for instance? Well, that would improve, and some of them certainly did close. And again, to make the analogy with what I experienced during the COVID year, yeah, same thing. The hotels really did close, and yeah, no sanatoriums, of course. But anyway, then what does he do? He's in a panic, he says. That it threw him into a complete panic. Well, can't blame him for that. So presumably he goes back to the hotel and gets on the telephone. And why it takes him all afternoon, I don't know. The way he phrases it, it sounds like it did. He says, I spent the afternoon on the telephone. Well, okay, even an hour, it would seem like would be a long time to find out that Schatzalp was actually open. He should have been able to do that in 5 minutes. But anyway, part of the reason, I guess, why he was on the phone all afternoon, as he says, spent the afternoon, is because he got to speak to Dr. Maurer personally. So maybe they spent some time talking, and he has an appointment then for the next day at 11:30. And another funny thing about this is that he clearly had not made any arrangements in advance. Apparently it was really a sudden decision, and he got on that train in Paris and off he went. He'd heard about Dr. Maurer, he'd heard about Schatzalp. Dr. Maurer, as we'll find out, had also heard about him, but no official appointment or date of arrival had been set. So when Dmitri, he can even be convinced that the sanatorium is actually closed, when of course it's not. And he makes the appointment now on the day of his arrival for the next day. Nothing is prearranged, so that's interesting. I was going to, what can I tell you about Dr. Maurer, Dr. Gustav Maurer? Well, we'll have plenty of occasions to talk about him, because he'll be figuring pretty much almost on a daily basis in the diaries. He and Maria has some strong opinions about Dr. Maurer too. So as I say, we'll have plenty of time to talk about him. Right now, I'll just say that he was 4 years younger than Dmitri. Dmitri was about to turn 48. So Maurer was in his mid-40s. He was a very charismatic man, very egotistical, big ego, very autocratic. He ran this place, so I've been told, with, not with an iron fist, because this was a luxury sanatorium, and you don't want to drive your patients away. They could always go to another sanatorium in town. But with the staff and in other ways, he was quite an autocratic individual, and he was, very definitely in charge. And so I, of course, didn't meet him. He died in the 1950s, but I have had the good fortune of knowing people who knew him, and also knowing people who didn't meet him, but or affected by some of the problematic things he did. So Maurer was a kind man. It was important to him to help people, especially in the immediate aftermath of the war. He did some very laudable things. But he also was a huge womanizer, and that, patients were not off limits. So that was problematic. But yeah, I don't want to get sidetracked talking about him. What I want to close with is just something that we'll see consistently in the letters and in the diaries, is how embarrassed Dmitri was by having this disease and how really isolated he felt. He'd always been a very social person, but now that he had this disease, he just wasn't. He just wasn't wanting to do that anymore. Well, a shy person, but he had been, out there in society and having lunch with people and all that sort of thing. And, that's ending now. And not because he couldn't have, and he will once in a while, but because, he was very retiring while he was here. That was what I was, that's what I discovered anyway in a letter written by the man who was the business director at Schatzau. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself with all that, but that's something to look out for, how he feels about having tuberculosis and being in a sanatorium. That's something that is just going to bother him a lot, unfortunately. All right, so what do we have next time? Well, he has this appointment at 11:30 a.m. on the Saturday with Dr. Maurer, so we'll hear about that. And we'll also hear about his first day as a resident, as a patient who will be taking up residence at Schatzau and not coming there as an outpatient. Okay, so look for the video that I'll be doing in the English corner of Davos. It's not called that anymore, but at the time Dmitri was here, it was called the English Quarter for good reason. And yeah, I will see you then. Thanks. Bye.